Hello and welcome to Altered Geek. I'm your host, Steve Megatron Phillips, and like I mentioned in the last Star Trek episode that I published on this show, I'm really hoping to capture a lot of the love that I have for this franchise and a lot of the content that I've done, or watched rather. I was hoping to do like a podcast series on the films years ago, and of course this is going to be covering the Star Trek films. My top 6, and of course it's very hard to do a top 6 when there's so many good films, and I'm going to be leaving out kind of one on purpose that should be in this top 6, but it's not going to be, and that's for a very specific reason, and I'll get to that before I get to my actual list. But I tried to do a podcast series on this, kind of covering and breaking down each film. And unfortunately, I didn't get around to doing all of them. We did, I think, 2 or 3, and then it kind of fizzled out, and it was a scheduling issue. So it kind of went on the back burner and just never got back to it. So I'm hoping with this that I can get to my kind of ultimate top 6 instead of covering them all individually. The honorable mention that I have here, it is Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. And I have that listed here instead of in the top 6 because it's kind of the pinnacle of the best of Star Trek when it actually started getting good, because the motion picture was such a bomb and a terrible film. I mean, it wasn't great and it wasn't terrible, but it's still not the best. That being said, The Wrath of Khan is kind of that go-to point where Nicholas Meyer, who's also involved with Star Trek Discovery and did Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, kind of shaped Star Trek into what it became, and added a little bit of that like military aspect and a little bit of the, actually grew the characters out beyond their two-dimensional selves that they've had since the original series. So my number 6 on the list, which may be a little bit surprising, is Star Trek Generations. And why did I pick this film? Well, it's kind of a funny point with this. I chose this film because when I was a kid, this was the first one I got to see in the theater. I know it's not the best film in the lot, but I think that this film is fairly well done considering all things in there. You got to have the Enterprise B, you got to have kind of a passing of the torch, much like they did in the rebooted universe. Except this had Kirk, Scotty, and Chekhov. This is the last time you'll see James Doohan play in Star Trek at this point, because it's after his Relics episode of TNG. And so yeah, it was pretty good, and you got to see like kind of the crashing of the Enterprise. You got to see Kirk and Picard, these two legends of Star Trek history, fighting side by side to take down the villain. And unfortunately, Kirk dies in that entire endeavor, which like tore me up as a kid because, like I said, it was the first film I got to see of Star Trek in the theater. And it just devastated me as a kid. But I love this film for what it is. You got to see the Enterprise, be damaged. You get to see the D destroyed, kind of setting that bridge of change in motion for the next film. And you got this nice aspect of both generations kind of playing in there. So I really love this film. Moving on, we get to my number 5, which is Star Trek: The Voyage Home. And I chose The Voyage Home because you get Star Trek without the ship. It's like a giant away mission, and they're trying to kind of get past this always being on the Enterprise. And of course, again, they lost the Enterprise in Star Trek 3. They had to destroy it to go save Spock. So in Star Trek 4, we get Spock rediscovering himself. We get a lot of comedy. We get them going through the 1980s, which is funny because that's when the film was shot, to get some humpback whales that will communicate with this probe, which they don't explain where the probe came from, what it's for, or anything associated with it. You'd have to read like the probe novel to kind of get the gist of it. but it's looking for these whales that are extinct by the 23rd century because of whalers and just conditions. So they took these 2 whales, which doesn't say if they were going to be extinct or not. And you get to see kind of a lot of different things. They're stealing nuclear energy for the Klingon bird of prey, where Uhura and Sulu and Chekhov go. And then you get to see Scotty and Bones kind of dealing with... Oh, no, and I think Sulu was with them, maybe. I can't remember entirely. I haven't seen the movie in a little bit. But they go to get this kind of invisible aluminum that Scotty helps the guy design like 10 years earlier, which, again, kind of calls back to the rebooted Star Trek. There's a lot of parallels in all the new rebooted universe, but again, everything is relative. It's all copied. It's all the same stuff. But I really love the film, and then by the end of it, you get the Enterprise A, the initial first shot of it. And for some reason, I love this ship. I always have, but I think it's because of Star Trek 6 and aspects in there. So moving on, we get to Star Trek First Contact. And Star Trek First Contact for me is probably the best TNG film, bar none. And you get the Borg, which is kind of their main adversary in the Next Generation. And even to some degree, it was, the instrumental part of DS9 in the beginning. But you get time travel. You get Zefram Cochrane, which develops the first warp-capable starship. And, it's really well done because it's, again, another time piece of jumping generations, kind of. But it's not pandering. It's telling a part of the history that they needed for the Federation, and you get Geordi getting the upgraded eyes. You get, it's just all the way around. It evolves a lot of the characters, so it's probably one of my favorite TNG films. Moving on from there to my number 3, we have Star Trek Beyond. Why is this film in here? Well, I'll tell you why. I'm actually impressed with this film, how well it did, by comparison to Into Darkness. And Into Darkness, I have a lot of issues with. You want to know the full reason, go watch or listen to Altered Geek podcast or Future Imperfect. You'll get to hear our full rundown of it there. But the Star Trek Beyond was pretty good because you got like a new starbase, the Yorktown. You got to start off, and they're still doing their 5-year away mission, kind of continuing and touching on new ground that the original series never got to, which is kind of nice because you get this kind of nod that it's getting episodic. Kirk's getting bored with it. Spock's getting notification that Ambassador Spock is gone, no longer alive, and so it kind of takes a toll on them. They're both dealing with some issues. But you get a lot more character development, certain characters, a lot more screen time for them. It's a lot less of like brooding and repetitive stuff. It's more original. And again, there's another piece that touches on old Star Trek history, actually predating Enterprise, because you get the USS Franklin involved, and it's lost, and they have to rediscover it. So like this whole show, like how it plays out, is really, really well done. Kind of a nice passing of the torch of almost getting people evolved into their original series selves, and yet they managed to create another splinter, like offshoot, so it doesn't go and follow that original series formula. So I think that it's really well done. Plus, you get another Enterprise A in this, so how could I go wrong? Moving on, for my number 2, we have Star Trek, the rebooted film. And I have this here because we get the first reprisal of Star Trek in 5 years from when Enterprise was gone. That was actually 4. But still, it was the first new film since 2002, which was amazing. I mean, that's 7 years with no Star Trek film. And which had been kept going since the motion picture. So that's still a huge thing. Plus, they got to reboot it and touch on a altered future or alternate past of the original series, and you get Captain or Ambassador Spock from the Prime Universe jumping over and kind of helping things along to getting course correcting things that happen because of him and Nero. So I really don't have to go too much into that because you get a lot of the same vibe of the original series, but with some new flair to it and some new action, and it just kind of shines as that new Star Trek series. And then my number one would have to be Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country. By far, this is about the only film next to Beyond that I think that I can watch continuously and not get bored of. As a kid, it was constantly in my VCR. And for those of you that don't know what a VCR is, Google it. Most people that are huge Star Trek fans are going to know what that is. That's just old school stuff. Anyways, it's basically starting off with Kirk and the original cast having their final mission before retirement. And they're going to put the mothballs on the Enterprise A. They're going to, the original crew is going to go their separate ways. Spock is dealing with the council, and they're supposed to usher in this peace between the Federation and the Klingon Empire after their moon Praxis explodes. Sulu's the captain of his own ship, the Excelsior. So it's kind of a nice, between the two, you get them having to work together one final time while Sulu's starting his mission and Kirk and the rest are retiring. And they're fighting this Klingon bird of prey with General Chang. I love they have kind of a detective investigative mode on the Enterprise, trying to find out who murdered Gorkin, and then there's the Klingon prison with Kirk and McCoy. I mean, the whole thing is just really well done, and my favorite parts are like towards the end when Kirk gets back to the Enterprise, and just the whole dynamic. The whole show is the whole film is just really well done. It's a Nicholas Meyer film, and it's directed by him too. So again, this is another masterpiece, kind of along the lines of Wrath of Khan, kind of giving them that awesome send off. And it's quoting Shakespeare throughout the whole thing, and they're coming up with the Klingon versions of everything. It's just, I really love this film. But so what are your guys' top 6? Or just even top Star Trek film altogether? Be sure to leave your comments down in the section below. Let me know. I'm really curious to know, because I think it'd be great to bring that up on the next episode and kind of touch on that a little bit before we kind of get any heavier into the other comments. Star Trek films to me are one of those things where they can tell this grander, more expensive story. I still think it belongs on television, but I really have a respect for the films, even though certain ones I don't care for. There's more good in the films than bad, so it still outweighs itself. So be sure to like this, subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Till next time, get altered, get geeky.